Hello, everyone, and welcome to our IQSA Zoom Seminar. We're so delighted to have Professor Ahmad al-Jallad joining us for this, our sixth session of the IQSA Zoom Seminar. Just a reminder to everyone that this is sponsored by the International Quranic Studies Association. I'd really encourage everyone to support IQSA at this time simply by becoming a member. So visit the IQSA website. And it's a wonderful community of friends and scholars, all dedicated to scholarship in Quranic studies. I'll begin with a brief introduction of Professor al-Jallad. It's not easy to keep it brief, and then introduce his title and turn everything over to him. So Professor Ahmad al-Jallad is a Sophia Chair in Arabic Studies at The Ohio State University. He is a philologist, epigraphist, and historian of language. His work focuses on the languages and writing systems of pre-Islamic Arabia and the ancient Near East. His recent books include A Dictionary of Safavidic Inscriptions, The Damascus Psalm Fragment, Middle Arabic and the Legacy of Old Hijazi. That's published with, the first book was published by Brill, the next book by the Oriental Institute at Chicago. And he's published many, you have to really be attentive to keep track of them, influential articles. And I'll just mention What is Ancient North Arabian, a 45-page article in the collected volume, Re-Engaging Comparative Semitic and Arabic Studies. He's also working on a forthcoming work with Princeton University Press, The Word, the Blade, and the Pen, 3,000 Years of Arabic, which will be a must-buy for everyone. Today, Professor Jallad will speak to us on Pre-Islamic Arabic inscriptions and Quranic orthography. So thank you so much for being with us, Ahmed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. I will share my screen now. Does everyone see the screen? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to this audience about the development, in a way, the development of the Arabic script, but particularly the script that was used to write our earliest Quranic manuscripts. Now, the talk that I'm going to give today is, is based on, one of these forever forthcoming articles. This article was submitted in 2017, I think the end of 2017. It hasn't appeared yet. A draft version is on my academia page, which you can go and read in full. And I'm going to update it a bit in the talk, and then and this article is concerned with some of the idiosyncratic spellings in the Quran and their lineage, their ancestry. How do we account for some of the spellings in the Quran that don't fit the synchronic logic of the Arabic script? Are these ad hoc attempts to write Arabic by an inexperienced scribe, or do they tell us something more interesting about Arabic's past, and particularly the writing tradition associated with the Quran? And I'll focus on one particular problem, something I call the digraph alif ya, or alif denticle, which is just a little tooth, or in another way, a new letter shape, the final of the final H, the denticled H. Now these will become clearer as I continue in the talk and show you these letter forms. But these are two particularities of the that we find in early Quranic manuscripts, and we also find them in the Cairo edition. And I hope in this talk I can trace their development back to a Nabataean ancestor and show how, in fact, when we talk about Quranic orthography, that is a sort of a simplified description of what's going on. The Quran is sort of a melting pot of early pre-standardized Arabic orthographies. And each one of these idiosyncratic spellings tells us a bit about how the Arabic script evolved and how these different pre-standardized traditions of writing Arabic met in the imperial Umayyad context and competed for influence until finally settling into what we call the Arabic script today. And so the Quran sort of preserves a fossil record of Arabic's orthographic history. So to begin with, the Arabic script, and it's abundantly clear now, the Arabic script developed monogenetically from the Nabataean script, which is a particular cursive script of Aramaic used by the Nabataeans in their kingdom. Their kingdom flourished between the 3rd century BCE and the 2nd century CE. And the script, you can see an example of it right here, is simply the Imperial Aramaic script that had developed cursive letter forms, or a more cursive style, owing to writing with ink. And that and the language of the Nabataean inscriptions in this period was, of course, Aramaic, a kind of imperial Aramaic. But the Nabataeans, while they used Aramaic to write official documents and produce monuments, their spoken language, their vernacular, it seems, was a dialect of Arabic. And so it is in the Nabataean context that we see the first attempts to use the Aramaic script to systematically write the Arabic language. The Nabataean, large portion of the Nabataean onomasticon personal names are Arabic, and we see, of course, in the inscriptions, large part of the inscriptions consist of personal names, and it's in this environment that we see the adaptation of the Aramaic script to write the Arabic language. In addition to this, there are some other attempts of writing Arabic, very few examples of Arabic prose or individual loanwords in Nabataean Aramaic. Now, the Nabataeans are conquered by the Romans. Their kingdom disappears politically in 106 CE, but their script survives. Their script and writing tradition, these two things come together, survive and flourish in Northwest Arabia. So after the political destruction of Nabatea, its script and the way, the stylistics and the orthography, the spelling practices, this entire package survives in Northwest Arabia and continues to be used by local groups, from perhaps small tribal sheikhs and their chancelleries writing administrative documents to maybe local kingdoms that we can't, let's say the political history is very difficult to recover at this moment. But we can see, though, that after 106, we start to see the beginning of the shift of the language of these inscriptions from Imperial Aramaic, from Nabataean Aramaic, to Arabic. And this is nicely captured in the very famous Nabataean script inscription, JS Nab 17 from Hegra, al-Hijr. The language of the text is Arabic, unmistakably Arabic, but there are certain formulae that require the use of Aramaic, and Aramaic survives in these domains. So, for example, the introductory particle dna, this is Aramaic, but then you have qabru sana'a ka'bu bar harithat li raqosh bart abd manoto ummu وهي هلكت فيها الحجر sanat, and then so that all was Arabic. But then now to give the year sanat, he switches to Aramaic. Mi'a washtain وترين بيرح تموز. So the formula used to write dates is Aramaic, and then it switches back to Arabic. Wala'ana, and then the name of the deity in Aramaic, Maray Alma, Lord of Eternity. So may Lord of Eternity curse, Man yushanna al-qabr da, wa man yaftahu hashay wuldu wala'ana man yaqbir aw ya'lay minh. So this is a perfect example of what we could call Arabo-Aramaic. The language, the main language of the text is Arabic, but there are certain expressions, certain domains that require the use of the Aramaic language. That is, of course, the dating formula, introductory particles, the words for son and daughter, bar, bart, and indeed the name of the deity. And this is an interesting balance, right? Because it shows that Aramaic has sort of receded and only survives in Northwest Arabia in these very formulaic contexts. After the fall of the Nabataean kingdom, we see the continued use of the Nabataean Aramaic script with this balance of Arabic and Aramaic in this area here in Northwestern Arabia. And when you look at all the inscriptions chronologically, you can, it's sort of a very nice fossil record. You can see the slow development of the Nabataean script, that is the letter shapes that of the classical cursive Aramaic letter shapes slowly developing over time into letter shapes that we would consider Arabic. That is, letter shapes that look like the alphabet used in the early Islamic period in the 7th century. Okay, and so that slow evolution takes place in Northwest Arabia and has been outlined in a beautiful way by Leila Na'meh in her 2010 article, Glimpses of the Development of the Arabic Script. So, how far south did this use of the Nabataean Aramaic script extend? It's hard to say. There is at least one graffito that's found in the Northwest Hijaz, Umayyad, that is by a man who comes from the town of Yathrib. Salima Ka'ir bin Aslam di min Yathrib. This is an inscription of a person using the class. So the Nabataean script here is in the classical shape. It's not it must be pretty early, and it shows and it suggests that the diffusion of the Nabataean Aramaic script and writing tradition and had reached the town of Yathrib. We see it's being used by both what seem to be local pagans as well as Jewish communities. We have this very nice inscription that was published by Nabataean in 2018 that's dated to Passover of the year 303 AD, right? So it's very likely that this individual was Jewish. Now, this balance between Arabic and Aramaic in this transitional between Nabataean and Arabic script, this balance continues even into the 5th century. So here in the early 5th century, we have a very nice inscription that looks almost exact, that displays almost the exact same balance as what we find in JS Nav 17 discussed earlier. Dakiru muharibu wa ashabu al-ashara wa ghunaymu wa wa'ilu wa harithu wa kahshu bitabu muharibu bar uwaid al-lat kat kitab yaduh yawm 10 wa 8 bi ayyar sanat, and then he gives the dates. So we see that the dakir, this is Aramaic, introductory formulae, but almost everything else is in Arabic. And the script at this moment is recognizably, is moving very close to the Arabic script that we know. You can see this word here, al-ashara. It is almost early Islamic in its style. You can see the alif is leaning over with the little tail. The sin is laying down. It is almost readable as the Arabic script. But the first inscriptions that we would call Arabic come from the end of the 5th century and the 6th century. These are pre-Islamic Arabic script inscriptions. And what do we mean by this? Well, simply that the letter forms have reached the stage that they have reached in the 7th century inscriptions. It is an arbitrary distinction between the Arabic script and the Nabataean script, of course. We simply call the Arabic script because it looks like the script of the 7th century. But it is a smooth development, right? And where we draw that line, it's an arbitrary line that historians of script and epigraphy draw. It's unclear whether users of the script would have distinguished their writing at any point in history, calling it Arabic or Nabataean. In fact, we don't even know what they may have called their writing system. But nevertheless, we have the earliest dated Arabic script inscription comes from north of Najran, a place called al-Hima. It's dated to 470 CE, according to the dating of the province of Arabia. So it uses a northern calendar. And the letter shapes at this point have completely reached the stage that we know from the Islamic period. And we can see the script is all over Arabia. You have an inscription, an example from Dumat al-Jandal, another from Syria, and there are several more in the northern Hijaz. The Arabic script at this moment had diffused across Arabia and the writing tradition associated with it as well. Now, the Arabic writing, as you might expect, the Arabic script at this moment in history was not unified. It was not standardized. There was no single political or single institution or political power that could have unified the writing of Arabic. And so the Arabic script and the Arabic inscriptions show some variation and in many ways look distinct and differ from each other and differ in important ways from the script, from the writing system used to produce the Quran, to write down the Quran. So one of the first examples is the continuation of the use of Aramaic spellings. So in these early inscriptions, you can see the word for I, ana, is written with a hey, sometimes. Ana here with a hey, and that's a continuation of an Aramaic spelling from the Nabataean tradition. It's just used in an Arabic context here. You also get forms like ana, which resemble the spelling in the Quran. Another thing that's very widespread is wawation, the use of a waw at the end of a word, at the end of a personal name, a triptych personal name. So for example, here you have the name Qais, the Qais, and there's a waw at the end, the Qaisu. It's written with a waw. We don't know at this late point whether it was pronounced or not. Here's an individual, Zalimu, which corresponds to Zalim in classical Arabic, Zalimu with a waw as well. Now this is a very ancient practice. It goes back to the classical Nabataean period. In fact, it's something we find in the writing of Arabic names across different early Aramaic writing traditions. So this too is an inheritance from that earlier period. Another thing that's quite interesting is the practice of representing internal long a with alif had not yet developed in any of the pre-Islamic inscriptions. So you can see here, for example, the name Ishaq, written alif, sin, ha, qaf, there's no alif. Thawban, no alif. Maliku, no alif. So the practice of representing internal long doesn't seem to be to have emerged in the well, it may have emerged in the pre-Islamic period, but it has not appeared in the inscriptions, and it's an important distinction, an important difference from Islamic period writing practices. And all of these early Arabic inscriptions are Arabic in script, but they are still very much this transitional Nabateo Arabic style in terms of orthography and writing tradition. We still see Aramaicisms. We still see the use of bar and bart for son and daughter. We still see the use of Nabataean numerals. So for example, here, 470 CE, this is the earliest Arabic script inscription. So we say that the script here is identical in its letter shapes to the later forms of the Arabic script, but the language is quite different. So you have Thawban Maliku, linguistically neutral, but it's dated to Biyarah Burak. Biyarah, again, is the use of an Aramaicism. And then Shat, again, an Aramaic spelling of the word for year, and then the use of Nabataean numerals. So you have here the 100, and then these are representing 1, so 300, 20, 40, 60, and so on. So the script is very similar to what we get in Islamic times, but the orthography and the logic, and in fact, the entire writing tradition is still quite distinct. This is not an inscription that one would get in the Islamic period, although the letter shapes have already reached that stage. Orthographic devices that we see in the later Arabic script also are absent. So there is no ta marbuta. Here you can see karamat al-layf and the ta maftuha to represent construct. There's no alif al-wiqaya. Ryan van Booten wrote a nice blog post on this problem. You have the plural verb adkhalu, and it's written with the final waw. There's no alif after it. So all these orthographic devices that we see in early Islamic period papyri and in the Quran are missing from the pre-Islamic inscriptions. And one thing that's not usually recognized, but I think that we need to emphasize, is this the change in the spelling of the name Allah, the God. So in Islamic period writings and in the Quran, Allah is written with 2 L's, alif, lam, lam, hey. But in the pre-Islamic period, and there's abundant attestations of this name from the Nabataean, classical Nabataean period until the 6th century. Well, in the 6th century, it's a bit difficult, but we'll see that the spelling is, as you would expect to spell a geminate letter, with just by producing that letter one time. So we have Salima Abdullahi. This in the Nabataean period, oftentimes the case ending will be written. So Abdullahi, but with 1 lam. And here in the transitional Nabateo Arabic script, Abdullah bar pe'ru. So Abdullah also with 1 lam. So this is an innovation that we simply that hasn't occurred hasn't been attested in the pre-Islamic Arabic inscriptions, with one exception that we can discuss in the questions and answers. So, comparing what we've just looked at very quickly, comparing these the orthography and the logic of the pre-Islamic Arabic script, it is very clear that the Quran was not written in the same script, and speaking about script holistically, including orthography, as the pre-Islamic inscriptions. Something happened. There is a script reform. The Arabic script, while the letter shapes remained the same, the logic of the script was reworked. The Arabic script, or we can say the late Nabataean script, which is again simply another way of talking about the Arabic script, was reconfigured at some point to represent the Arabic language. And it is, and that must have happened at a date, perhaps at a date later than the inscriptions that we've just looked at, right? But by the time we reach the Islamic period, it is a new kind of a new kind of writing tradition, a new orthographic practice that's being used to put the Quran into writing. And we can see, and this is, so in Perf 558, this very famous document, one of the earliest document from the Islamic period, we can see how both the pre-Islamic Nabataean style and this reformed style, which we can just call Umayyad because it appears in this later period, maybe pre-Umayyad, maybe Umayyad's not the best term for it, but that these two sort of exist side by side. we can see that the transition is not complete yet. So in this document, we talked about the name Allah. We see in the Bismillah, Allah is spelled in the way that we're used to from the Islamic period, but the name of the individual, Abdullah, is written in the pre-Islamic style with one lam, right? Abdullah. Names tend to be archaic. They can preserve archaic spellings, exactly how the name Amru, which till today has the waw at the end, which is a vestige of wawation that we've seen elsewhere, is only preserved in that name, right? Even though it's been thought of to signify something else. We have here Ibn Jabr. So in the pre-Islamic period, we'd expect a waw after Jabr because it's a triptotic name. But the scribe signs his name Ibn Hudaydu with wawation at the end. So it's as if the script reform happened, but the older writing style, the older orthographic style persisted or remained, but only on the margins when someone wants to sign their name or perhaps writing the name of someone else. The Quran shows, I think, a similar mixed situation. There are some parts in the Quran that are innovations, right? Like the loss of the use of the alif to represent the glottal stop. And pre-Islamic inscriptions, you use the alif to represent the hamza, and the Quran, it's gone. And that probably has to do with a change in the dialect of the Quran, which eliminated the hamza. There's no wawation, as far as I know, and there are people who are watching this who know more about what to find in different early Quranic manuscripts than I do. But there are no examples of wawation, the putting of waw at the end of triptotic personal names in the Quran, even though this is nearly universal in the pre-Islamic period. And the name of God, Allah, is written with two L's, not with one. There are pre-Islamic relics in the Quran. For example, you have the internal alif written with the internal long a written with the alif, but there are some exceptions when it's not, right? And it seems to almost be in free variation. The ta marbuta is productive, but as Maraim from Putin wrote a lovely article about this, there are cases in which the older spellings persist, like ni'mat Allah with the ta maftuha, and there are inconsistent uses of diacritics. There are some diacritics there are no diacritics yet in the pre-Islamic inscriptions. So the Quran is a mixed bag, and a way of understanding some of the orthography in the Quran is by looking at the pre-Islamic inscriptions. Now, from this point, I want to look at an oddity of Quranic and even later Arabic spellings that are not been, I think, recognized and discussed within this framework, and that is the spelling of the word 100. So, for example, here we have this is a Nabataean Arabic inscription from 303 AD. We see the word 100 here, mim alif, and it's in construct with the ta, so mi'ats, which doesn't match what we get in Quranic spellings. Now, sometimes we get mim ya hey or mim dentical hey, that's true, but mim alif dentical hey is the more common spelling. And in fact, that's the spelling that even continues to our time. Now, there's not a single pre-Islamic inscription, and the word 100 is attested quite a bit, that spells the word 100 with an alif and a dentical. Yeah, that is a strange, innovative spelling. Why is it spelled that way? It doesn't come from an older pre-Islamic tradition that was lost. In fact, it seems to be that interpretation seems to be an innovation of the Islamic period and of the tradition that put the Quran into writing. The same thing, and on the margins, so the normal way to spell ilah in the Quran is alif lam hey, but in some manuscripts you get this very rare spelling with an extra denticle here, alif lam, this little denticle hey, and most scholars have interpreted that as an attempt to represent imala, ileh, but it's odd that it occurs primarily here, and we don't see it in documents that use this kind of spelling to represent where we would expect imala and other places. So I wondered if these two spellings are related. Is it possible that these odd spellings here are related? And if they are, do they have a pre-Islamic antecedent? Can we understand the emergence of these spellings by looking at the material that I have presented? Let's look at ilah in context. So this strange spelling of ilah, we actually find in the pre-Islamic inscriptions. This is the Jamal inscription, and it occurs in the name Abdullah. You have Abdullah, and here you see Abdul Ilah, sorry. And you see ilah, written lam, dentical, and the circle. Here's another inscription put online by the Fariq al-Sahra from northwestern Arabia. Alif lam, alif, then there's the lam, there's the denticle, and the circle. These look very similar to this. In fact, there is a difference though. If you notice these circles, they don't have the little horn on top as this one does. That's because we don't have two letters here. It is not alif, lam, dentical, hey. In fact, this final sequence, the dentical and the circle, is one letter. And that's simply an alternative form of the final hey. And you can see how Layla reconstructs this development here. You can see it in another word. This is a person named Amru bar Usayla. Ayn sin lam, ayn sin ya lam, and then there's the dentical and the hey. It's one letter. So there is this pre-Islamic letter shape that of the final H, of the final hey, which consists of a tooth and then the circle after the tooth, rather than the tooth on top of the circle. Now, is it possible that that letter shape continued into the Islamic period, especially in high frequency words, and was perhaps misinterpreted or and reanalyzed by later scribes? Well, we can see, for example, that it occurs, that exact letter shape occurs in certain early Quranic manuscripts. Here you have al-akhirah, and you can see the dentical and the hey. It cannot be anything else but al-akhirah. That final letter here has to be a hey, but you'll see the dentical is not on top of the loop, it's beside it. It's in fact one letter. I even found it in one of these lovely inscriptions that the hashtag Muhammad93Athar on Twitter, which you all know, posted. وَمَلَائِكَتُهُ Mim, lam, ya, malaika, ta, and then there's your final hey. Dentical and the loop. It's one letter. So there is this, it seems that this letter shape, which we see in the Nabataean Arabic inscriptions, that we see as a pre-Islamic antecedent forms, continues into the Islamic period and is deployed perhaps for stylistic reasons, or it's certainly not the primary shape of the final hey, but people knew about it and used it on occasion. So can that final hey help us understand the weird spellings of words like 100? Well, it can. Remember, in the pre-Islamic times, 100 was simply spelled mim, alif, and hey, or mim, alif, and ta. Well, if we understand that final sequence of the word 100 as one letter, we get the exact pre-Islamic spelling, mim, alif, and denticled hey. It also helps us understand the weird spelling of Torah in the Quran, which is spelled again which is spelled with a denticle before the hey, which some have supplied an alif, some have tried to come up with all kinds of reasons why that denticle is there, but in fact it just seems to be a frozen spelling of perhaps a theologically significant word, ta, wa, ra, and final hey, which is exactly how you would expect to spell Torah in Arabic. In these two words, mi'ah being very high frequency and Torah being theologically significant, we can see that the final hey perhaps lingered on here when it was lost elsewhere, right? And you can see them deployed here. Torah, right here, it's usually given a dagger alif to tell you it's not a ya, but in fact, we might be better to understand this as one letter altogether. And of course, mi'ah occurs many times with this spelling. So the final hey, it seems that this letter-shaped final hey allows us to make sense of certain Arabic spellings, certain spellings in the later Arabic writing tradition and in the Quran, and also allows us, and we also do see it occasionally deployed in manuscripts and inscriptions. Now, it's clear though that it was not a productive letter, that most scribes probably couldn't understand, and we could see this in the way that manuscripts that have the dentical hey are voweled later on. They treat it as a ya, or they treat it as truly a different letter separate from the ha, and that's why the ha sometimes gets its own tooth. But there's this concept, and I want to use the dentical hey to try to understand other strange spellings in the Quran, innovative spellings. And it's a concept I would call script contact, and it basically means when scribes using two different orthographic traditions meet, and those two different orthographic traditions start to influence each other through reinterpretation or misinterpretation, right? So the question that we can ask is, what would a scribe who uses the Arabic writing tradition as we know it, what would they make of a spelling like mi'ah? And let's say that scribe also had an Arabic dialect with a hamza, mi'ah, right? What would they make of this spelling? Remember, they don't have a denticled hey. And one possibility is to produce an artificial pronunciation, ma'ah, And you can find that in the dictionaries, and indeed you can find that even being used today. Ma'a, but that pronunciation has no basis in any other Semitic language, and is certainly just a reproduction and attempt to make sense of the orthography. The second interpretation is that the scribe understands the alif and ya here, or the alif and denticle, to represent the glottal stop, which was not graphically represented in the script. Remember, the Arabic script at this moment didn't have the glottal stop, but the scribe is reading mi'a, and he assumes then that, or she assumes that this sequence here could represent the glottal stop. And if you take that, if you posit that reanalysis, it starts to allow you to make sense of a lot of very strange spellings in the Quran, like bi-ayatin, where you have b, alif, denticle, ya, and then ta. Now that spelling doesn't necessarily make sense, even if you want to lose the glottal stop and say biyayat. The appearance of the alif before the denticle is unexpected. But if you take the alif and denticle as a representation of the glottal stop, reanalysis from that sequence of mi'a, what you basically have is a plain A spelling of the word, biyayat, right? Biyayam, bi'ay, bi'aid, bi'aidin, bi'ayikum. And you can collect quite a few different cases where the alif plus denticle seem to represent a glottal stop, an attempt to write a glottal stop, a phoneme that had disappeared in the Arabic script of this period, right? And you can see that also that this attempt, like writing internal alif, was not consistent. It was sort of an experiment. So you have spellings, for example, like kulli shay'in here, where there's no attempt to write the glottal stop. But here you see sheen, alif, and then what we could call ya or denticle as a way perhaps to represent the glottal stop. So it is it seems to have, we could posit, hypothesize, that this strategy was part of an experimental phase of the Arabic script to represent sounds that did not have a glyph assigned to them. And of course, it dies out. It is not a successful strategy. It gets lost, and what you end up getting is a diacritic for that phoneme. So to kind of conclude this, this tour of pre-Islamic spellings and into the Quran, I would say that the archaic final hey that we saw, the denticle plus loop, was frozen in high frequency words and in certain words that have maybe some theological importance like Torah. And that this form here, that this shape can be explained as a separate letter shape in pre-Islamic times, but by the time you are in the Islamic period, it isn't analyzable anymore and just seems like a, how do you say that, an aberrant spelling. And that perhaps scribes seeing this and unable to analyze that final denticled hey as an independent letter, reanalyze it from this high frequency word mi'a as simply a strategy to represent the glottal stop. And that's why wherever we get these glottal stops in throughout the Quran, and we can sometimes encounter this very strange sequence of alif denticle to try to represent those sequences, right? And in the end, this alif, the denticled hey, this digraph doesn't catch on and goes extinct. This experiment doesn't catch on and goes extinct and just leaves its traces in a few high frequency words, perhaps, or in certain frozen Quranic spellings. And everything was going against it, of course, because digraphs as such are not really used in the Arabic script or in really Semitic script. So it was already a strange exception to the logic of the writing system, and the ease of and the use of the diacritical glottal stop allowed one to keep the rasm in most cases intact. So there wasn't much advantage to continuing to use this form. Thank you all very much for your attention, and look forward to discussing this with you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Thank you. One of the disadvantages of Zoom is that you can't hear our applause, but I'm sure everyone is very grateful. Yeah, that was terrific, and I'm happy to transition now to, you see comments coming in on the chat box.
Let's see if I can see the,
yeah.
Let's say this, where are we? You will field the questions, correct?
I will field the questions. If you can maybe stop the share,
yes.
then we can see each other more easily. And Yeah. So, and friends, just a reminder, if you would like to ask a question of Professor Jallad, feel free to hit participants and then click that blue hand to raise your hand. And yeah, the expressions of appreciation are flooding in now.
Oh, that's very kind.
So, thank you so much. Why don't I start? I saw, I think there was a question in the chat box, but I'm gonna take advantage of my role here to ask the first one, which I think is a small one, but maybe it leads into a larger question. So you can do with it what you will. But you shared with us a Nabataean inscription from 267 CE right at the beginning of your presentation, and it had the Aramaic Mar Alma, something like that.
Yeah.
Lord of the world.
Yes, Lord of eternity. Yeah.
Or of eternity. Okay, so that's a marker of time.
I think it's well, I would say that particular inscription doesn't have any anything but the phrase Mare Alma to be able to identify the confession of its author. But because we have that phrase used in the Jewish inscription, the Passover inscription, and it is a Jewish epithet for God, I would say that I would hypothesize that the author of JS Nab 17 was probably Jewish, and it's probably a Jewish inscription. Yeah. So Lord of the world, Lord of eternity. I mean, you can render it, but it would be, I think, if you were to calculate that into Arabic, you would get Rabb al-Alamin, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you anticipated my question. Okay. Very interesting. Great. There's a question from Malik, and then I will recognize, I think Murtaza has a question. So I don't know if you see this, Ahmed. Malik, it's been funneled upwards as comments come in, but he asks, at what stage of history we find the final drawing was standardized? I don't know, Malik, if you want to unmute. Do you mean of the dentical hay from the Nabataean writing in specific?
So Dr. Ahmad mentioned that we see early differences, as he mentioned in the Cairo in the Cairo version, and comparison to other inscriptions we are finding outside the Quranic script. What stage in history we reach the final standard way of drawing Arabic as we know it?
Yes, so the Quran is not the Quran itself does not represent a standardized orthography, because we still have much variation within that text, and how that variation entered the text, whether it reflects the choices made by different scribes who were in charge of or who produced the materials that were compiled into the final Quran, or stylistic choices of the same scribe is unclear. But it doesn't reflect a single standardized orthography. When we talk about standardized orthography, and I think we're thinking of classical Arabic orthography, that doesn't happen until rather late. I mean, even in the Dome of the Rock inscription, we have very much Quranic spellings that look very Quranic. Yeah. Like
in history, we have 3 referrals to things happened in the Quranic writing. We have the story of Uthman bin Affan, who asked the people who are developing the standard copy to write it in Quraysh language. And then we have another introduction of a new writing with the Hajjaj, and then we know from Abdul Malik bin Marwan and later that he ordered Arabic to be the official language of the Umayyad. So these are 3 instances we have a political intervention to do something. Do we have any evidence from either the scriptures, early manuscripts, or even the inscriptions we found that reflect something, or we don't have this cut in the scripture development?
I wouldn't say that any of those 3 stages would correspond to the major reform that distinguishes Arabic writing in the Islamic period from the pre-Islamic period. Whatever that major reform happened before all of these things. And Christian Robin hypothesized that at Yathrib there was a script reform, could be. It's unclear when that script reform took place, but it does predate all three of these moments in history that you mentioned. There's one caveat I think I need to mention too. We are perhaps comparing apples and oranges, as they say. When we look at Quranic orthography, we're looking at an ink script. We're looking at a book hand. And what we're comparing it to in pre-Islamic times is graffiti, and graffiti tend to mimic monumental text, monumental writing. And monumental writing is archaizing. So it may be the case that these types of reforms happened in the pre-Islamic period, but we don't have the type of document that would preserve those changes. Because when someone goes to write a graffito, they're writing it in the monumental hand, and the monumental hand uses the older orthographic style. So that is possible. And one thing that might support this is the Jabal Usais inscription, which is very short, doesn't tell us very much, but it doesn't have wawation. That's one important thing. It has no wawation, but it still uses the Aramaicism, it uses the Nabataean numerals, but it does not use wawation. And it's the only inscription in the pre-Islamic period that doesn't, and it's an inscription that we can associate with Ghassan, with the Jaffnids. So perhaps their court initiated some kind of reforms to, let's say, get rid of the parts of the Arabic script that were inherited from the Nabataean period, but that did not reflect or did not have a phonetic a reality in the Arabic that they were using, like wawation. Perhaps that happened, but of course we can only speculate until new texts are discovered. But I think importantly, none of those, all these reforms that I've mentioned must have happened before the three periods that you mentioned. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent question. We have a number of other questions now. I already promised Murtaza and then Ali and then Marine. So Murtaza.
Yeah, but thanks for your presentation. I just want to know how much this script reform might leave room for a kind of variant reading of the Quran, by which I mean, because most of, I'm exactly talking about what Christopher Luxemburg is talking about, that most of the time we read Quran as a purely modern Arabic kind of a scripture. But it seems that even according to what you said, there is some originality in Arabic language plus a kind of a script reform which leaves room for a kind of variant reading. So how much does it leave room for us to read Quran as not necessarily an Arabic text, but a text that might be sometimes better to be read as a kind of Aramaic Arabic kind of language? For example, if we want to understand the meaning of some words which does not fit well within the context of that verse or that passage in the Quran, is it not sometimes better to look at some Aramaic dictionaries and not necessarily Arabic ones? Something, because I really expected a kind of semantic discussion or kind of semantic section in your presentation on what kind of effect these, changes in the scripture might have on the meaning of the words and interpretation as well. Thanks.
Well, yeah, that's sort of outside the domain of orthography. What I would like to point out is that the hypothesis of an Arabo-Aramaic, well, we've been looking at it, right? So the Nabateo-Arabic inscriptions are in the type of language that Luxemburg hypothesized, the Arabo-Aramaic. So it looks very different than what we get in the Quran. We can see the way Arabic and Aramaic mix in these texts. It's very obvious that we're dealing with a mixed register. And the Quran not. But one thing I will say is that when it comes to the semantics of the Quran, the most important, and I think there are better people to ask here than me, but it's important to derive the semantics of the Quran from the Quran's context, its late antique context, and we must recognize that opening up Arabic dictionaries can be sometimes just as methodologically problematic as opening up Aramaic dictionaries, right? Without being able to understand the historical semantics of Arabic words, we are sort of just picking and choosing what fits our needs when we open up a medieval Arabic dictionary, right? Because we can't take for granted that the semantics in those of any given word there would have been present in a 7th century Arabian context. So I would say, at least in terms of semantics, the best way to start is to try to reconstruct that context itself and work with texts and cultures that the Quran would have been in contact with, right? It's a very small, I think, very obvious thing to say. But I'm afraid that spellings like this don't lead us in the direction of, I think, radically new readings of the text. Akhira is akhira, whether it has identical or not, right? But what akhira meant, with identical or without identical, can only really be understood within its within that by reconstructing that context, I think.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to turn to Ali next, and then I see that Naila Tabara has a question in the chat box, and also Sada. So we'll get to those, and to Marine, of course, but we'll start with Ali, please.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I really enjoyed the talk. Since I was already familiar with your theory, and I have looked also on your article. Because I'm working on some Sana'a manuscripts, and I looked at the Bi'ayat example. So it was very interesting for me to look if your hypothesis works there. And the interesting point is, it's systematically in these manuscripts, you find the ayat with two diacritical points under the first tentacle. So I could not put your theory in these examples, because at least the person who has written the text, and these points are very early, it's the same script, it's the same pen. So these 2 points, these two diacritical points are mentioning that the first tentacle should be read as ya. So it's like bi-a, and then ya, and then we have the second tentacle, which is could be read as a or a, I don't know, like imala or something like this. Because we have already talked about this, imala is in the Quran or not in the previous talk. I'm just wondering how you do elaborate this.
Well, I don't think two dots under a ya or under identical mean it's a ya. And so Marine can give you nice examples of alif maqsura with 2 dots under it, but which clearly is marked to be pronounced as a long a, right? It's not marking imala or anything. It's just simply the case that the glyph itself can come with 2 dots, right? So we shouldn't always interpret 2 dots as a marker, as a definitive marker of a ya pronunciation, right? It's just simply the glyph. But I think even so, the question isn't about the question is how or the question is, was that digraph, let's say, reinterpreted by the scribe as he used it or not? Because I would say already by the time you have your earliest manuscripts, these spellings are not productive. So this strategy of writing in this way is not a productive strategy, even when you get your earliest Quranic manuscripts. It's already perhaps archaic and easily to be, and very easy to misinterpret or to reanalyze. So for example, with the writing of ilah, you get by later scribes clearly an instruction to pronounce that as an a vowel, right? Whereas we can see in the at least in the pre-Islamic examples that there isn't such that we don't have that liberty, because we can see there clearly the denticle is not on top of the hay. So I would just be a bit careful about assuming that 2 dots mean precisely a ya. It could be, it could be.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
Because the question is why 2 dots under the first, not under the second? Because if it's and if you go through the manuscript, you see that the person is very careful about putting where the dots. So why he did not put the dots on the second one?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Unless the dots are assigned systematically, and I think that there are I can't think of a single. Well, maybe this is, I don't know. But are the dots applied completely systematically to everything, or are they still used in this in the way that we see in most texts, where the scribe deploys the diacritical markings in, well, sort of an ad hoc way?
In this case, at least it's very systematic. I mean, it's not every ya has 2 dots, but
yeah.
when you got the dot, except for this case, it's a ya. And this is the only example, and that was took my attention to look at your theory if it works or not.
I don't think that that has anything. I don't think that has necessarily that wouldn't be the way to test the theory, because the theory is not saying that that the alif dentical is synchronically interpreted as a glottal stop. It's an archaic spelling. So what you can basically say is, in this manuscript, the scribe interpreted the spelling as a ya, the way that the mi'a spelling can be interpreted as a ya, the way the ilah spelling can be interpreted as a ya. So you have that disconnect between the development of a spelling and the way it's interpreted by scribes that don't systematically employ that spelling. You see? Yeah, so that's the distinction I would make. Yeah.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. If it's okay, we'll keep going in to try to, or going on to try to get a few more questions in.
Please.
Dr. Naila Tabara asked Ahmed about the relationship between Nabataean and Dadanitic, or maybe I'm mispronouncing it there, Dadanaic, Dadani in Arabic.
Dadani, Nabataean, and in
terms of orthography.
Orthography, well, Dadanitic is written in a local ancient North Arabian alphabet. It has a completely different, it functions along a different system. It has a different, let's say, script lineage. But the Nabataeans do end up annexing that part of North Arabia. So whoever was producing Dadanitic inscriptions in the past, their descendants must have switched over to writing Nabataean inscriptions. But the two scripts are, Nabataean has traces itself back to the Imperial Aramaic writing tradition, and Dadanitic is an ancient North Arabian script. So they're quite.
And what languages are written in the script?
Well, the Dadanitic writes a local Arabian language called Dadanitic. Occasionally we get Arabic inscriptions or things that look very close to Arabic in the Dadanitic script as well. But in general, it records a local Arabian language. Fokelin Kotstra wrote her dissertation on the writing schools of Dadan, the writing traditions there, and the language of the inscriptions. So you can see Fokelin Kotstra on Dadanitic in the Google. You'll find the dissertation. Yeah.
Great. And Sada had a question there. I don't know if it was addressed already. Sada, was it about the small alif? So I think, yeah, go ahead. Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say it was addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. About the small alif, yeah. So, and then we can turn to Marine.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I think so, huh?
Yes.
So Ahmed, I have a, so I like this idea of doing the ya-hey in reinterpretation as a, you know, as a final ha thing, but I'm not sure if it can explain, say, the bi-ayat, bi-aydin, bi-ayyam kind of things. First of all, I mean, those spellings are pretty regular, right? But the weird thing with them is that they really seem to be conditioned by a ya being later in the word. So, you know, it's either, you know, bi-ayat or bi-aydin or bi-ayyi even. Do you have any idea why that might be happening?
Well, yeah. So so there are two things. There's one, the identification of the denticled hey, right? So that's the word we get. That's what we get in Torah and Mi'ah. That's one issue. It's just the identification of this final letter shape. And then the second part, and I think the second part is what's hypothetical. The identification of the letter of the denticled hey, I think, is rather clear. The second part is, can this letter shape, or can reanalysis from this letter shape explain some of the things that Marine is commenting on? So of course it's much more than just that, because you get this in words like shape, you get it in ji'a, you get it in certain verbs. So you get the alif dentical in a lot of contexts where you have originally a glottal stop and some kind of I vowel. The I vowel seems to be the triggering, seems to be what's triggering this. In terms of there being a later yeah there. This, I mean, we can speculate. I don't think we have enough data to prove why it's deployed in such a context. We can say that, well, perhaps there's an orthographic, there's a dissimilatory reason here, that by marking so that you don't have two sequences of denticles, but they're all ad hoc because they're not systematically deployed in other contexts. And when I see ad hoc spellings like this, even if they are restricted to a certain class, what it immediately strikes you as is that we're perhaps dealing with an archaism, and what you have is an archaism competing with a new plain A form of spelling. You see what I mean?
Right.
And so whenever I see that kind of let's say spelling patterns that are not analyzable synchronically and that don't make much sense using the productive logic of the script, we're probably dealing with archaisms, right? We're probably dealing with a defunct spelling that somehow made its way into these manuscripts, and this is not the only case, right? There are a lot of other competitive spellings of this sort as well. And
although I mean, especially with these BIA things, I mean,
yeah.
really writing it with 2 yas is the regular way of doing it. The exceptions are doing it without. So there's something strange going on there, I think.
There is, and I wonder if, and so basically what we're missing, I think, to complete the story, is we don't know we don't have a profile, a complete profile of the individual writing traditions that contributed to the materials that were eventually compiled as the Quran.
No,
you see, we don't have, so we see this spelling alif dentical, right? I tried to come up with a hypothesis of how that could have come about, because it's definitely not pre-Islamic, it's not ancient. Now, but that came about within a certain scribal context. There was a writing school, there was a tradition, and they produced this. And they must have produced documents within that tradition that made it into the Quranic compilation. But because we can't reconstruct what other scribal practices go along with that, because that writing school obviously disappeared, and so did all the others, we get these decontextualized, what are now archaic spellings littered throughout the Quran. And I think that forces us simply to speculate, as we are right now, about why they are distributed the way they are. Why is shayt, and I think it's impossible. We can't answer why shayt is sometimes spelled with a ya, which is the regular way, and why with alif ya. Right?
So,
we can't. We can't explain the why in terms of distribution. We can simply
it's strange,
observe.
but
we can simply observe.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, indeed.
Well, it's pretty cool to be able to listen into a conversation between Dr. Jallad and Marine on this sort of stuff. Unfortunately, we are running up against the end of time. I don't know, Ahmed, if you want to really quickly, there's a question there from Kashif. It's a big question, though, I think. It's about the definite article, the alif lam, which I don't think we were seeing in the pre-Islamic inscriptions.
We get it, yeah.
Oh, we do, okay.
Yeah. So we have the alif lam in the pre-Islamic inscription. We could say 6th century, but even earlier. So we get it, but we get there are different ways of spelling it. So when Arabic is written, it depends on where you are, because the definite article is realized in different ways. So let's just stick to the 6th century inscriptions in the Arabic script proper. So you have the definite article sometimes written alif lam, and you have at least one inscription from the Tabuk area where the alif is just simply not written where it would be elided in pronunciation. So for example, wal rumh or war rumh is written waw lam ra mim ha. And that writing practice did not, of course, become mainstream, and it does not end up becoming the way to write Arabic. In the Arabic, you end up writing the alif lam as a single unchanging word most of the time. Most of the time, there are some exceptions with prepositions like li and so on. But then we also have the alif lam written fully, as we expected from later Arabic writing. And we have one inscription from the area of Tabuk that uses the am article that we all know as being Yemenite. But it's up at Tabuk quite early. Am the year, right? So that's quite nice. So you get the am article and the al article in the 6th century. And if you go back earlier than the 6th century, the diversity of articles, you have many, many more kinds of articles that you get in Arabic.
Okay, terrific. I see May has a question. What I'm going to do is just give a final note of appreciation, but I'll keep the Zoom session going on a little bit after stopping the recording, May, if you want to get your question in. Just a reminder to everyone to continue the conversation on Twitter. If you have other questions or questions that come up, using the hashtag IQSA Zoom, Professor Jallad is on Twitter, and many of the participants are as well. And another final reminder that next week, our last session of the IQSA Zoom seminars is by Robert Hoyland. He'll be speaking on Arabi and Ajami in the Quran, the language of revelation in Muhammad's Hijaz. So please come back next week. We look forward to seeing you. And join me, however you might do it, in thanking Professor Jallad.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening.
Ahmad, I just wanted to point